Hey guys, Mike here from Lunch Money Comics. I was recently in beautiful upstate New York doing some fall activities with my family when we stumbled upon an indoor flea market. I stopped to see if they had any comic books and was shocked to see a car parked just outside the door full of them. The guy that owned them had a booth inside the building, which you'll see in a few minutes, and had just gotten in a new collection that he was preparing to bring inside. However, it had started to rain and he wasn't willing to bring them in just yet, but was letting people go through them in the car. There was actually a guy ahead of me who made it pretty clear with his body language that he wasn't letting me go through these before he did, but I was happy to wait. Now, everything was priced at $1, and at first I had my doubts I'd find anything good. As you can see, most of it was 90s books by smaller publishers, but I started to find some decent $1 buys like Spawn #1, and the more I looked, the more DC and Marvel titles started to appear. I realized afterwards that I sort of started with the worst possible box. Moving on to the second box, I quickly found a minor key issue, a book whose key significance I think is a pretty dubious claim, but we'll talk about that later. Now, like I said, these were all $1 except the Spider-Man comics, which he had marked up to $3 because presumably they just sell the best. But the more I looked, the comics got slightly better. I started finding some interesting titles and a ton of G.I. Joe comics, oftentimes in multiples, and that will certainly come into play later in this video. I also started seeing some older books from the 70s, which was very exciting, but I ended up finding some very interesting books scattered throughout these boxes, which were definitely worth picking up for only $1. So although the comics in the car were sheltered from the rain, I most certainly was not. So after going through the boxes quickly, I went inside the building. It was actually a relatively new consignment shop and was surprisingly big, with all the typical stuff you'd expect to find in an indoor flea market, but it was the same seller's indoor comic collection that drew my immediate attention. A lot of this stuff was similar to what I found in the car outside, except it was better titles, it was in better shape, and in some cases it appeared as if he had just bought out an old 90s comic shop, as there were dozens of copies of the same books, like with the Todd McFarlane Spider-Man run and John Byrne's Superman. There was also lots of Walt Simonson Thor as well, which definitely I could have done some damage picking up most of that run there, but I did find a few more books in here to round out my interesting stack of comics, but it was actually my son who ended up with the best find of the day. So let's go back to the comic room and I'll show you guys everything I found. So there you go, guys. That was a completely random stop at a random indoor flea market in rural upstate New York. Like I said in the voiceover, I was spending the weekend with the wife and kids up there. We actually brought the kids to Howe Caverns, a really awesome and pretty big cave system in upstate New York. Really cool. It's actually really close to Cooperstown and the Baseball Hall of Fame, and we spent the entire weekend just doing some fun fall activities. It was a great time. But whenever I travel anywhere, I look for these types of places in case they have comic books, and this was a place that was right near where we were staying. I don't remember the name of the place, but I'll make sure to put it down in my description. And yeah, it appeared to be a relatively new consignment shop. It was pouring rain. We pulled into the parking lot. I told my wife I would be quick, and she told me, well, that guy's got comic books, and I thought she was pulling my leg. I thought she was having a go at me and teasing me, but then I realized she was right. We saw the car full of comics, and this guy was carrying comics in. Just a crazy, serendipitous time to show up at this place. Couldn't believe it, and he did have a lot of comic books, and I could have done a lot more damage than I did, but I ended up with a rather small stack of comics. However, there's some really cool books in here. A couple of these are pretty deep cuts, and there's some great stories attached to them. So I thought this deserved its very own video. So before I show you what they are, if you like this sort of stuff and you want to support the channel, head on down, hit that like button. You don't have to, but I'd really appreciate it. And you can always follow me on Instagram under Lunch Money Comics IG. So the first book that I want to talk about, you saw it in the footage. This is a book that I always pick up for $1, guys. Everyone knows what it is. This is Spawn #1 from 1992. First appearance of Spawn, created by Todd McFarlane. For those of us who grew up in the 90s, guys, this is a very iconic book. And despite the fact that there was a ton of these made and printed, it's still a book that, a lot of people in my generation really, really like, and they still seek it out. So very happy to pick this one up for $1. Can never say no, and the same is true of this second issue, which was right next to it. All right, so this next issue definitely has a fun story attached to it. I mentioned in the voiceover, I thought this one had a very dubious key issue claim, and it is this. This is John Byrne's Next Men, #14, also from 1992. Now, Next Men was a creation by John Byrne. He did the story and the art. It was published by Dark Horse Comics. But the key significance here has nothing to do with the Next Men characters. Instead, this is often cited as the first cameo appearance of Hellboy. Hellboy, pretty famous creation of Mike Mignola. It's actually starred in his own movies. Yeah, some people think this is his first cameo appearance. And I think that is very, very dubious at best. Because I mentioned not too long ago on my channel that Hellboy has a very convoluted and complicated first appearance history. I recently talked about a book, Next Men number 21, often considered his first color and cover appearance. However, he appeared several times before that in various different comic books, promotions, and brochures. So one of those first appearances was that he appeared in something called Dime Press number 4. He appears on the cover, but he's not Hellboy as you know him. He's not red, and it wasn't actually supposed to be published. It was actually published by an Italian company. So a lot of people consider, yeah, it's kind of like a prototype of Hellboy. Mostly people cite the first appearance as San Diego Comic-Con Comics number 2, which was an SDCC handout. That is his first appearance, but he's only on the inside in black and white, which makes Next Men number 21 his first full appearance in color. However, this issue here, Next Men number 14, predates both the Dime Press number 4 and San Diego Comic-Con number 2. And why does that matter? Because there's one single panel in this book where they say Hellboy appears. And it is right here. I'll actually put it up on the screen so you guys can see. He appears in one single panel in the background as part of a poster. And you can see it is clearly Hellboy. You can tell from the sawed-off horns. It also says Hellboy, at least partially. But that's it, guys. That is the extent of this so-called cameo. So, for those of you who are big Hellboy fans and you're completionists, yeah, this is a book you should definitely get. For the rest of us, I would say go for one of the other books. Certainly Next Men number 21, I think, is the superior comic book. But still, it's worth mentioning because, yes, you can find this book often in dollar bins, or even cheaper, actually, although I sometimes see it for between $10 and $20. Guys, hold out for this book. You can definitely find it pretty much anywhere. All right, next up, I mentioned that on the inside of this building, this guy had a ton of comics, and it appeared that he cleaned out like a 90s comic book shop. There were multiple copies of things like the McFarlane run on Spider-Man, where you'd have like 10 of every single one of the issues. Same was true of the John Byrne Superman, and there was one that I had to pick up, and it was this, the first issue. Superman number 1 from 1987. This is the John Byrne run. He wrote and did the art on this. He was a really busy guy in the late 80s and early 90s, guys. And this is actually the reintroduction and origin of Metallo, a cyborg with a heart of kryptonite. Pretty cool villain, actually, to go up against Superman, and actually a pretty scary one at that. So happy to pick this book up for $1, guys. It's just a cool, iconic book. Yellow cover. I don't know why I'm a sucker for yellow covers. Next up, this is a really interesting one. This is a book I've seen multiple times, in back issue bins. And when I found this, it was close to Halloween, so it was worth picking up. This is All New Creepy Things, published by Charlton Comics in 1975. Interesting Tom Sutton cover of some sort of alien swamp creature. Now, this is a collection of creepy stories, horror stories, at least as scary as Charlton would publish, done by various people. And there are various artists in here as well, including a young Mike Zeck, who would later on, in the 80s especially, become a very popular comic book artist. But yeah, I just like this cover, guys. It was interesting and evocative. Had to pick it up for $1. Also, there were a lot of books that were in there that were sort of promotional, and you'll see what I'm talking about. One of the titles that was in there was Marvel Age. Now, these Marvel Age comics were published between 1983 and 1994, and essentially they were full-size comics of like the Marvel bullpen. In the comic books, they'd have a section where Marvel would talk about what's going on there, about upcoming titles coming out, the artists and writers would answer questions. It's basically a full-size one of those. I would call it almost like a fanzine. And you see this one is a special one because it features Stan Lee. It's a special Stan the Man Lee issue, number 41. It's from 1986. And yeah, I just thought it was really cool. The Return of Sam's Soapbox. I also want to point out this is a Marvel 25th anniversary book. Normally they have that, border with all the characters around them, but this one doesn't need that because there's a ton of characters on the cover that Stan Lee had a part in creating. So I thought it was cool and worth picking up. But I mentioned there were also previews in these Marvel Age. Well, I also found this one. So this is Marvel Age number 97, and this is considered by some to be the first appearance of Darkhawk. Now, Darkhawk was a very early 90s character in 1991. They really pushed him hard in the early 90s. Sort of a anti-hero, darker looking character, very futuristic looking. And to some people, he was pretty awesome. I thought he was pretty cool. Other people absolutely love him. Shout out to Mr. Swagglehouse himself. And a lot of times they would publish previews to get people excited. Well, this is the preview for Darkhawk, and although we don't usually consider previews first appearances, this does predate Darkhawk number 1. This could be considered the first appearance of Darkhawk. I thought it was kind of cool, fun to pick up for $1. I like Darkhawk. Speaking of Darkhawk, I also found this. So this is Darkhawk number 45. Now, here's the thing. Look at what we're talking about here, guys. We're talking the early 1990s during the comic boom and then subsequent bust. And they were publishing and printing a ton of comic books and pushing a lot of new characters like Darkhawk. But as the comic industry started to crash, they started printing less and less and less of them. And that was especially true when you got towards the end of a title. When that title was struggling, they started to back off on how many they were producing, and they did not make that many. So Darkhawk only went 50 issues, but when you get to the end of that run, issues, 45 and up, the issues become very scarce. They had very, very low print runs, and for those who love Darkhawk and want to be completionists and finish that run, they need all these books. So that's why I picked this one up. I've actually found this book in the past for like $1 and then resold it for like 15 bucks. Not worth a ton, guys, but definitely when you see these low print run comic books late in the run, sometimes they're worth picking up. Early to mid 90s is where you find a lot of these. Speaking of early 90s stuff being pushed on us, here's another one of those characters. This is Sleepwalker number 1, another character that came out at the same time as Darkhawk that I remember very vividly. I actually associate him with Darkhawk quite a bit because he was one of those characters they made the Marvel like trading card rookie cards for. And Sleepwalker is a very interesting character. He is sort of an interdimensional alien from like a dream dimension. And he's got a creepy, kind of cool alien look. And I liked Sleepwalker, but he wasn't that popular. This, title definitely didn't last. But this is his first appearance. And as a 90s kid, guys, I can't help but pick this book up for $1. All right. It wasn't just comic books that were there for $1. I was very surprised to find this. This is a trade paperback of the Uncanny X-Men. And then the guy who was selling these, he was still there. When I went up to the counter, I asked him, is this cost $1 like everything else? He said, absolutely. So I love trade paperbacks, guys, especially when it concerns the X-Men. This is primarily how I read my X-Men books. And this is an older one from the 80s. And I love these ones. They're full size and in full color. It's beautiful and really, really nice. But what makes this one so great is that it republishes Uncanny X-Men issues 129 through 137. And for those of you who are X-Men fans, that hopefully rings a bell. This is the entire Dark Phoenix saga. The whole thing right here, one of my favorite X-Men stories of all time, a seminal work, absolutely, by Chris Claremont and John Byrne. It's absolutely awesome, guys. And although I own, the entire Dark Phoenix saga in comic form, and I think I own the entire thing in like trade paperbacks, they tend to be broken up over multiple different volumes, or sometimes they're missing an issue. Well, this is the entire thing in one place, and man, am I happy to have a book I can kind of cozy up with on the couch and read the whole thing. For $1, guys, absolutely, I will pick this up. Fantastic pickup. All right, staying on the X-Men train and tying in with my whole promotional comic stuff that I was finding, I found this. So this is Amazing Heroes number 192 from 1991. And again, this is kind of like a fanzine. It published all upcoming things in all comic books, whether it was Marvel or DC or Dark Horse. It's all in here, guys. And this was made up of, concept art and interviews and previews and price guides, everything in here. That's pretty cool. And I do see these from time to time. But why this one jumped out to me? Well, there's a couple reasons. One, you see there's an amazing cover by Jim Lee of the X-Men. And two, you see right here, Jim Lee and Chris Claremont on X-Men number 1. So this is them talking about X-Men number 1 from 1991, adjectiveless X-Men, which most people associate with Jim Lee, but Chris Claremont did write the first 3 issues. There's an interview with each of them in this book here. And because I'm a big fan of that series and Chris Claremont, I had to get it. And it's pretty awesome, guys, because Chris Claremont, let's start with him, because, he talks about all sorts of things. He talks about his history on the X-Men title. He talks about the new series. He talks about interesting things like the fact they're making Magneto mean again. For the last decade or so, he is kind of like a more sympathetic character, but now they're kind of making him a bad guy. Just a great read from Chris Claremont's perspective. He even talks a little bit about DC Comics and Superman, which I thought was pretty cool. But it's the Jim Lee stuff that actually blew me away for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, guys, they asked him why he ended up doing 4 different covers for X-Men number 1. That's pretty famous. It's a gatefold. You put them all together, it makes a great image. But here you see actually Jim Lee's concept art, his original, sketch that he came up with, which I thought was really neat. But the coolest thing in here, guys, is that they give us a preview of a character that's about to come out in the series. A character that comes out in issue number 4 by the name of Omega Red. And there's actually concept art in here of Omega Red. It actually appears several times in here, and I love this concept art, guys. I think it's really cool. You get to hear about, where they came up with the concept. But here's the thing. This predates X-Men number 4, the first appearance of Omega Red, by a couple of months. So I tried looking this up. I couldn't quite figure it out, but I think this is actually the first sort of published work that has Omega Red in it. So I thought that was really cool. I think Omega Red is pretty cool, and I just thought that was a very interesting thing. One more thing I want to point out when I looked this up, evidently this comes in a couple of different versions. There is a blue font version of the trade dress and a yellow one, and depending on which source you look at, one of them is rarer than the other ones. I think it's the yellow one. Again, this book isn't worth a ton of money, but it's cool to have sort of the rarer variant. But because it's got this Jim Lee cover of the X-Men when they came out, in that Jim Lee run, and it's got a preview of Omega Red, I think it's actually a pretty good book, and I did see it can sell for a little bit of money. So as an X-Men collector, guys, absolutely worth $1. Not something you see every day, not something I've ever seen before. Absolutely had to pick this one up. Which brings me to the last two books, guys. I mentioned in that footage that there was a ton of G.I. Joe comics. Now, I am not a huge G.I. Joe fan. Of all the cool cartoons and toys that we had in the 80s that I was a fan of, the G.I. Joe was my least favorite. I was more of like a fantasy guy. I liked He-Man. I liked, the Thundercats. I didn't really like G.I. Joe, despite the fact that all my friends did. In fact, I distinctly remember in kindergarten, all the other kids brought their G.I. Joes to school so we could play with them. I didn't own any. All I had was my Star Wars Kenner figure, so I brought a Lando Calrissian. I took his cape off, and I brought him instead because he was the most normal-looking guy, right? All the other ones were aliens and stuff. Lando looked just like a guy. It could pass for a G.I. Joe. So I distinctly remember that, guys. I was never into G.I. Joe, and because of that, I was never into the comics either. And other than the very first issue, I don't really know of any that are like key issues or anything like that. Well, I learned my lesson the hard way because a few months ago, I was at a flea market going through some comics. I made a video, and in the footage, people saw me go right past issue number 154, which is a very late run scarce issue. Similar to what I just mentioned with the Darkhawk, G.I. Joe, when it got to the end of its 155 issue run, they became very scarce before they canceled it. So that is actually what I was looking for. So thank you to all the people that pointed that out. I got to learn something from all of my viewers, and I won't let it happen to me again. And because of that, I ended up with 2 G.I. Joe books, which I think are notable. So the first one is this. This is issue number 130. So a high number, but not like super scarce or anything. But I did find out that this is actually a key issue and has some first appearances in it. So, first appearance of Captain Gridiron, Freefall, Updraft, and the Laser Vipers. That's it. It's a higher numbered issue. It's got a first appearance. I thought I would pick it up for $1. I have some friends who are really into G.I. Joe. But it's this last issue. This last issue was the best surprise of my entire haul. Because it's this. This is G.I. Joe Giant Size Special 150th Issue Spectacular. Now, there's a couple things going on for it. 1, it's a milestone issue. 2, it's very late in the run. Again, only 155 issues, so we're almost at the end here. This is a very low print run. 3, it has an awesome cover of Cobra Commander going up against Snake Eyes. Even not being a big G.I. Joe fan, I know who both those characters are, and it's a very cool cover. Let's see who did this cover. It was Bill Gozier and Randy Emberlin is who did this cover. But when I got home, I rebagged this book. And here's what I noticed. On the back of the bag was a print. And I looked at it and said, hey, that's pretty cool. I wonder if it was an insert on the comic book. And it says, Flint and Lady J. That's who's depicted on it. And I noticed a signature right there. It's a real signature. It's in a metallic pen. And then I noticed the same signature on the front. It's kind of hard to see, but it's right on Snake Eyes' leg right there. So I got excited, guys, because I'm trying to decipher it. It's hard to see, but I saw what looked to me like an L as the first initial, and then the last name started with an H and then a scribble. So immediately my mind went to Larry Hama. Now, Larry Hama is a G.I. Joe legend, pretty much penned the entire run. Super famous, and I got really excited. If this was signed by Larry Hama, I think it would be worth quite a bit, and I'd be pretty excited to have it. However, I went online and looked, and Larry Hama has a very distinct and very legible signature. It's crystal clear, nice big block letters, Larry Hama. So I knew it wasn't him. But I also couldn't figure it out because those names don't match any of those artists I just mentioned. So I did a little bit more research, and I discovered that the inker on this was Chip the Crusher Wallace. And upon some further investigation, I did find another book signed by Crusher Wallace. That's actually what he went by. And this is, in fact, his signature. So here's the thing. It's cool that this is autographed, but Crusher Wallace isn't one of those like really big sought after artists. He really isn't. Again, he just inked the book and presumably he did the art on the back of this. So normally I think, a pretty cool print like this and an autograph would up the value of this book. I'm not entirely sure. If it was Larry Hama, absolutely. But I'm not sure if this actually deters a little bit from the cost of the book. I'll tell you why. People trying to finish their G.I. Joe runs, they want these books to be perfect. It's not unheard of to find a 1994 book in perfect condition. You let me know down in the comments, guys. Do you think this helps or hurts the value of this book? Again, if you are a purist, I don't think you want this signed. But the fact it comes with a bonus piece of art, it's from 1994, it's double signed. I don't know. I thought it was pretty cool. I still think it is an incredibly rare and scarce book. I did see this selling online, upwards like $75 depending on condition. So definitely worth more than $1. But let me know down in the comments what you think this signature does to the value of this book. I would love to hear from you. But that's it, guys. I only got 13 books, which means I spent a grand total of $13. Clearly, I think there's a lot more value here, and there's definitely some books and reading material I'm happy to add to my collection. Let me know which one of these is your favorite, and do you think I paid a good price? Now, I mentioned in the voiceover that I thought the find of the day actually belonged to my son, and that's because the guy that was selling these comic books was also selling cards, not only sport cards, but also trading card games like Pokemon cards and Magic cards, which my son absolutely loves. And I understand that most people are here for the comic books, but I think even if you don't know anything about these cards, you will still enjoy this story. So my son is going through these cards, and they were listed at 10 for $1. So he starts going through them, and the guy, the comic guy and the card guy, was still there. He saw Jack going through these and he got excited. He's like, hey, you really like these cards? And my son's like, yeah, I really like them. He's like, I'd love for you to have them. I'll make you a really good deal. So we counted up the cards roughly, and there was like 1,700. So if we were doing, 10 for $1, it's $170. He goes, I'll tell you what, because you really like them, I want to sell them to you. I'll knock off $100. I'll sell you the whole box for $70. Now, I told the guy, well, we'll think about it, because Jack wanted to spend his own money. And also there's a lot of filler in there. There's a lot of land cards and stuff like that. So we go through the whole box, and my son only ends up with 140 cards. He wanted more, but he was okay with 140 cards, which was $14. So when we go up to the counter, the guy was still there, and he said, hey, you don't want the whole box? And Jack's like, no, I just want these $14 worth. And the guy looked at him and said, I'll tell you what, if you give me one more dollar, I'll sell you the whole box. My son looked at me with wide eyes. I looked back at him. I said, shake that man's hand. And Jack walked over, shook his hand, and bought the whole box for $15. This guy just wanted to see a kid end up with these, and just the smile on Jack's face and this guy's face was priceless. And of course, guys, we brought the cards home. There was a ton of value in there. There was a ton of cards that were modern rares and a lot of older cards, even going back to the revised 3rd edition set that I used to collect. Definitely a lot of value there. And again, the smile on Jack's face was priceless. So I can't speak highly enough about this place, and certainly this vendor. He was awesome. So again, I can't remember the name of this place, but I will find it and put a link to it down in my description. If you find yourself near the Howe Caverns or near the Baseball Hall of Fame, definitely worth stopping into this place, guys. There's a little bit of something there for everyone, and I'm happy to give away this bit of a honey hole. So that's it, guys. Head on down again and tell me what you think of everything in this story, in this video. Do you think I paid a fair price? And in the meantime, keep hunting for comic books in strange and unusual places, like roadside flea markets when you're on vacation with your family. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.